And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. Well, it took 6 months of intense and often confounding campaigning to get here, and now in just a matter of hours, New York will have a new governor. Andrew Cuomo will quietly be sworn in at 10 o'clock, and he's going to officially take over the state's top job at midnight. And then, of course, the real work begins. The state's 56th governor set the bar quite high for himself. So does Andrew Cuomo and his incoming administration have what it takes to save the Empire State? That's just one of the questions I will be posing to my next guests. They are, of course, some of the reporters who courageously cover the Capitol and are kind enough to spend part of their New Year's Eve with us. Casey Seiler is the state editor of the Albany Times-Union, and across the table, Nick Reisman is a political reporter for the Gannett News Service. Thank you both for being here. I appreciate it. So we will not be inside the governor's mansion. This is a departure. We actually had a pool reporter for this 4 years ago. It was me.
Was it awesome?
It was pretty cool. Yeah, it was cool. I don't know. I mean, does it seem overly secretive to you? There will be pool video, and which means, and we should explain for the viewers that pool means we all get to partake in whatever comes out of there, but it's just one camera, one still, and one video.
It's all basically the same thing.
I think it's two photographers. It's going to be the AP and the New York Times who are going to be shooting it tonight, and then other limited numbers of photographers shooting things going forward.
But the idea that there's no print reporter,
Yeah.
I don't know. How do you feel about that as print reporters?
Well, there's already limited space in even the inauguration speech that he's going to be giving the next day. There's only going to be 175 seats, and he's going to be delivering the speech in the war room of the Capitol, which, 175 sounds like a lot, but when you consider the number of people who went to Eliot Spitzer's inauguration 4 years ago, it's not even a 1% of that.
Right. So he's not doing a lot in terms of public access.
Right, and print reporters want to be everywhere, and of course you're not going to get a print reporter who's going to say, "Oh no, that's okay, I don't need to be there."
No, really.
So, no.
I'd rather be out celebrating.
Right, exactly. So yeah, it would be nice if a print reporter could be there, but it's nice that there's going to be a photographer there, or two sets of photographers there. So.
Do you think tomorrow's going to be the first speech that he gives as governor? Obviously, we've heard Andrew Cuomo speak quite a lot, and we know about what he thinks about what the state needs and how desperately the state needs to be rescued, etc. What kind of tone is he going to strike tomorrow, and do we have some feeling about what he's going to say?
Well, it's definitely not going to be a celebratory tone at all. It's going to be one where he's going to be talking about the problems of the state, all the fiscal woes that the state faces, and it's only going to be 10 to 15 minutes long, but he's going to try and cram all that in there. And he's also expected to kind of talk about his plans on bringing the public into the debate, bringing the public into the problem and having them solve these issues. The voter turnout was very, very low for a statewide election. Even in a non-presidential year, it was very low in New York. So he's going to try and fire the public up as much as possible with this speech, and it's going to be kind of a framework for him in the first legislative session.
He's road-tested a lot of this material in edit boards and sort of speaking to reporters throughout the campaign and even after the campaign. And Nick's absolutely right. The idea of the public's disaffection with and cynicism over what goes on in Albany and really what goes on in all the halls of government is going to be a major theme. And how he's going to manage to pivot that and try and bring it home and talk about actually taking care of some of these problems that's going to be the real test.
Well, it's interesting because we're seeing this a lot of back-to-back speeches, actually. The inauguration is going to be quick, as you mentioned. It's not going to be rapid. It's not going to be long at all. You're not going to have a lot, if any, lawmakers. I mean, Albany Mayor Jerry Jennings will be there, but he's not a state lawmaker, so he will not be in the room. And then, of course, just a couple days later, you're going to have the big State of the State address, and then a couple weeks later, you're going to have the budget. So I think that these things are going to come out very rapidly. Yeah. The State of the State, of course, he has relocated, and not everybody is pleased with that. I think it's interesting because he's going to let the public, as we're talking about, not enough transparency. He's not allowing the public in through print reporters, the eyes and ears, if you will. But he will have people auctioning off tickets to come into the State of the State.
Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of gavotte he's engaging in with Sheldon Silver right now. Silver went to pains, almost overdid the kind of, oh no, I'm not hurt, I'm not insulted at all, in having this
don't worry about me.
This Keystone address, this one of the high points of the political career. It's no longer taking place in his house. It's now taking place in the lovely confines of
I think
the
he even
convention
said it would have
center.
been a fire hazard if they had it in the assembly
Well,
chamber.
it does get really, really crowded in there.
That's
you have
true,
to admit.
yeah.
It does. I
Yeah, it
mean,
gets packed.
I remember they put the press riser right behind the special guests. And the special guests are always crammed in. They're sitting cheek by jowl, and it's like Governor Kerry who's getting up there, and Governor Pataki, and all of the commissioners, and they're all sort of crammed in very tightly. So there will be more room, but I think that, there are some assemblymen. Jack McEnany's made it very clear.
He's upset?
He's
Yeah.
quite upset. He thinks it's a slight. And it's not going to have as much pomp, I don't think, as it would in the assembly.
There's something to be said for, the governor walking into this huge, ornate assembly chamber and, walking down the middle of the aisle and giving a speech up there on the dais with, Shelley Silver behind him and the Senate Majority Leader sitting there as well. The auditorium, though, that he's going to be speaking in is going to be a lot bigger, and it's also maybe going to be a little bit of a better forum or backdrop for some of the things he's going to be discussing, which is going to be the early part of his budget.
And the symbolism is impeccable in the sense that the
Yeah.
show, this is Andrew Cuomo's show. It
Not
is
the
not
assembly.
the legislature show. And also in the Senate, they're kind of like, well, we didn't like going over to the assembly. We're perfectly happy to go somewhere else. If you don't
Right,
want.
because they didn't get to sit in their seats,
Right.
the senators. They had to sit in seats that were set up for them, and
Yeah.
the assemblymen all got to sit in their own seats. And, what will be interesting to see, do you think there will be a change in tone because the state lawmakers are not in their own house? Will they be more decorous? Will they be better behaved? Because in years past, we have seen speeches where there is actually booing. We have seen speeches where there's a lot of cheering. One half of the House will stand up and cheer, one house won't. And we spend a lot of time counting the applause lines and seeing who does what.
It's going to be interesting just to see how it's going to be lit.
Yeah, good point.
Whether or not, because of course the assembly is lit up, it's very bright, you can see what everybody's doing, you can see who's standing up and sitting down. The convention center, if it's lit for a conventional speech, you're not going to be able to see nearly as much
But
of what
you
the
said, Casey,
what the
it'll be like
audience
the
is
Andrew
doing.
Cuomo show because there'll be a spotlight on the speaker. I mean, we're talking about a stage situation. There is a
Right.
stage. I mean, we haven't seen, so maybe he'll be standing on the floor, but I can't imagine that he would do that. No one
No.
would see him.
Yeah.
But then again, this is about changing who we talk to, right? He's speaking to a different audience. I think he has already signaled a willingness to be outside the beltway, quote unquote, although we don't really call it that here. But still, he wants to talk to the people, and that goes to your point of trying to enlist popular support, not the legislature.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then there were some people who said that the War Room sent a message itself because, of course, it has war in the title, which is not necessarily.
It's just a name.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we're reading a little bit too much into some things.
And
I think the War Room might be just, it's just a name, and it's an interesting backdrop because it's a very interesting room. The many interesting and weird rooms of the state capitol building.
It's one of the most beautiful rooms, and it does have these incredibly martial murals across the ceiling. And I think somebody noted that the podium is going to be directly under a mural from the French and Indian War of a Native American going after
I'm sorry,
a trapper.
Nick, really? You don't
So-
see? You think we're reading too much into that?
Well, and that's part of the problem of Andrew Cuomo not providing a lot of access to print reporters, because when he doesn't talk on the record to reporters, or when he, goes an end round and, tries to go through the media filter, if you will, then we're left to, well, what does the War Room mean? What does having it in an auditorium versus the assembly chamber mean exactly?
Yeah, I think I don't know, obviously, but I think he knows exactly what kind of symbolism that is. And there was a really interesting story in the New York Times today about these phone calls that he makes to people. And this great quote from, I think, Kathy Wild from the Partnership of the City of New York, who said, sometimes you're not even sure. You're left wondering what it was that he was trying to say. Exactly.
Well, it's like apparently Warren Beatty makes calls like this too, where he just calls up and sort of almost works out what he's thinking just through the medium of the conversation. So.
And just before we go, I also want to note, he is actually being Attorney General right up to the very last moment.
Yeah.
There were two press releases that came out of his office, his
Big
Attorney
ones.
General office today. One was how he's going to be allocating the student loan settlement money, and the other was a settlement with insurance.
companies.
Okay.
Yeah, for more than $100 million.
That's a
I
great
believe.
deal amount of money, yeah.
But what's this about? Is this about cleaning everything up so Eric Schneiderman doesn't have a chance to do anything right out of the gate?
Well, you know, Eric Schneiderman and Andrew Cuomo, there's been a lot of speculation of whether these guys will get along, whether they have gotten along in the past. You know, remember when you had 5 Democrats running for the primary for Attorney General, Andrew Cuomo kind of sat on the sidelines, and there were some reports about, well, you know, maybe he's going to endorse the Nassau County District Attorney Kathleen Rice, who ultimately didn't win. But when Schneiderman won, Cuomo waited a few days and then eventually endorsed Schneiderman. But, you know, yeah, their relationship is not one where you would say it's very warm or one where they're going to be strategic partners in government.
Yeah, but you could say that Cuomo it really is clearing the decks and allowing Schneiderman to sort of set his own course and pick his own fights, as it were. If you were Schneiderman, would you want to have the prospect of a long, drawn-out battle with Stephen Ratner,
no.
you know, staring you in the face?
No. No. But also, I mean, there were problems. There were things that Eliot Spitzer left over from his Wall Street battle that Andrew Cuomo had to then make a decision about fighting or not fighting, and in some cases he did not. I mean, I think you make a good point. You could see it both ways. He's either clearing the decks because he's trying to be a good guy, or he's shutting off the possibility of some early high-profile wins and some pretty good headlines for a person that he may or may not have wanted to succeed him in the office.
It's also a matter of, you know, dotting your I's, crossing your T's. You know, when he runs for re-election, presumably as governor, you know, he doesn't want his opponent to say, well, he vacated the Attorney General's office and left all this unfinished business.
And another thing is that many of the people who have handled these cases are going with him to the executive chamber.
Right.
So you could make the case that by wrapping these things up, he's essentially keeping the data all kind of in one place. So.
Yeah, he is bringing an unusual number of people with him from the Attorney General's office and then on to the executive chamber floor. It's going to be a really fascinating administration, I think, and a really sort of rather tiring week.
It already is.
I know. I want to thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate it, and Happy New Year to you, Nick Resman,
New Year.
also to you, Casey Seiler. Thanks so much.